everyone. I'm Gary Sturgis, the creator and founder of Surviving Grief and the author of Surviving Grief 365 Days a Year. So, I'm going to talk about 5 ways grief can help you rediscover yourself. And one of the reasons that I want to talk about this is because, when we lose someone that we love, we also lose other things. And so the question I get so frequently, not only on my Facebook page, but also when I'm coaching people or I'm facilitating a grief support group, is people say, like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know. I feel like I lost a part of myself when my spouse died, or my child died, or my sister, or my mother. And so we lose we lose this person that we love, but we also lose part of ourself. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that we lose is our identity. So for example, say you lost a child and say your child played soccer. So you were a soccer mom or a soccer dad, and you spent most of your time going to soccer games and being with all the other parents of the kids that were playing soccer. Well, when you lose your child, you're no longer going to these soccer games, so maybe you're not seeing these people anymore. So that's a loss. That's a loss of who you identify, part of who you identified yourself as, being a soccer mom. And then also, it's the same if you're a spouse. If you lose your husband or your wife or your partner, you're used to going to things together with other couples. And then when you lose this person, you're all of a suddenly a single person again, and you may not feel that you fit in with these other couples. And so that can be difficult as well. So it's the same, for losing a spouse or losing a child, or whoever you lose that sense of identity. And then another thing you lose is your purpose. You hear people that are grieving a loved one say all the time, I don't know what my purpose is now that the person I love is gone. And I think this is particularly true if you were a caregiver. So, for example, I was a caregiver and I took care of my spouse for quite a while, suffering with cancer. And so my days and nights were so hectic in being in that role of a caregiver. And so when I lost my loved one, I didn't know what my purpose was anymore, because my purpose had become taking care of this person I loved. So there's a lot of ways that we lose our purpose, especially if you're a mom or dad and you lost a child. You're used to taking care of this child, raising this child, and then all of a sudden they're gone. So we lose our identity, we lose our purpose. And the other thing that we lose that's really important is we lose our happiness. We you may find that you're no longer finding joy in the things you once loved doing. And I know for me that was very true, because I really love to read. If you've read my books, you know that I'm a huge Stephen King fan. John Grisham, Stephen King, my top two favorites. And I couldn't pick up a book. And so for me, reading was something I enjoyed doing, something I loved doing, and losing that was almost like a secondary loss. So that's what I mean by we lose our happiness. We lose that sense of, doing the things that we love to do. We all of a sudden have no interest in them. So we're not getting any joy from doing those things that once brought us joy. So really it comes down to the question being, who am I now? What and it's kind of like, who am I now and who do I want to be now? And what will that look like? So how do I figure out how to rediscover myself and find myself? The thing is about grief is grief changes us, but it also helps us to find out who we are now, and that the person now that the person we love is gone. How do we find who we are now? So I want to talk about the 5 ways that grief can help you rediscover yourself. So the first one is it makes you reevaluate your priorities. And what I mean by that is it makes us think about what truly matters in life, what's important to us. Maybe you were someone that was, a person that loved to have a nice car, or you were always worried about how your house looked, or, and I think that material things all of a sudden after a loss don't become important to us anymore. And I know that that's what happened to me. I felt like you know, I always worried about not having enough money, or not having, not being able to buy the things I wanted or go on the trips I wanted to go on. And after my loss, I really didn't care anymore because I realized that a lot of those material things just weren't important. And this comes up a lot in my grief support groups and when I coach people, is that they say to me, we all struggle with what do we do with our loved ones' possessions after they die. And I always say to people that, it's really just stuff. The thing that we loved about that person was that we loved them for who they were. And so the love that we have, I always say when we die, the only thing we take with us is the love that we gathered while we were here on earth. So I think, trying to reevaluate your priorities and understanding what's important to you now is one of the ways that grief can help you rediscover yourself, because it makes you realize things that you used to think were so important to you are no longer important. And so the next way that grief can help you rediscover yourself is it deepens your self-awareness. And I think that goes along with what I just said. It gives you a deeper understanding of your own vulnerabilities. So maybe you were a person who, always saw yourself as a strong person. And then after you have this loss, it just takes us to our knees sometimes. It crumbles us. And so I think it's important to realize that you do have these strengths that you don't. I feel like this. I feel like when you lose someone that you love and you're going through the grieving process, which is, as you know, horrible, um, you realize how strong you are. Grievers, we as grievers always hear people tell us, you're so strong, you're so brave. And the last thing you're probably feeling is strong and brave, because, you're down on your knees, just a shattered mess, and people are telling you you're strong. But I think that grief does, in a sense, make us understand what our strengths are and maybe make us realize that we're stronger than we thought we were. And so when I had my loss, I never thought I would survive it. I thought this is going to take me down. And I always say that when you're grieving a loss, you can either let that loss destroy you or you can let that loss drive you. And so you have to make that choice, whether this is going to be something that takes you down forever, or something that you're going to find that inner strength that you probably always had and didn't realize it, to survive what you're going through. And also, I think it highlights your coping skills. So you find out what are the skills that you possess that help you to rediscover who you are now. So for example, if you think about other times in your life, I always say that life is not always good. We go through this lifetime of ours. We have happy times and we have sad times, and we have difficult times and we have easy times. And so I think it's important to look back on your life and think about the times that you had something tragic happen or something difficult happen. What did you do then? What coping skills did you use then to get through that difficult time in your life and that difficult situation? And that can help you a lot in trying to rediscover who you are after this loss. And then the third one is it builds resilience. And what I mean by that is it requires adapting to a new reality. And so when you have this loss, we say to ourselves, well, what's my purpose now and who am I now? And it makes us realize that, this terrible thing has happened, and quite frankly, we're thrown into this. We didn't have a choice. This is not a life we wanted. I hear people talk about, you hear people say all the time, I'm in this club I never wanted to be a member of, and that's true. And so it's dealing with, it's accepting that reality, and then it forces you to do things you thought you couldn't do. And so I always say, do that which you thought you couldn't do. And here's why. Because if you are afraid to do something, grief makes us fearful. It makes us afraid of everything. I know after my loss, I don't have children. And one of the things I thought about was, I thought, well, who's going to take care of me? I took care of my spouse at the end of their life, but who's going to take care of me at the end of my life. And so that caused me a lot of fear. But I think that it also forced me to do some things I didn't want to do. For example, reaching out to other people and trying to come up with some kind of plan for myself. You know, what was I going to do if I got sick and I was in the hospital, or I got sick and I was at the end of my life? It forces us into thinking about those things. And I think that's part of the way that we adapt to the new reality of what we did. And that's what builds this resilience that we now need, now that we're oftentimes on our own. And so the fourth way grief helps us to rediscover ourselves is it creates new connections. And what I mean by that is seeking out support that leads to new directions. And so the way you can do that is by, friends and family, and especially support groups. And if you know me at all, and because part of what I do is facilitate grief support groups, you'll know that I am such a big advocate of them, because that's what helped me in my loss. The very first thing I did after the loss of my spouse was I joined a grief support group, and it was a support group specifically for people that lost a partner or a spouse. And I think, there's a lot of groups out there that are for all different kind of losses, and they're fine. But I think it's helpful to be in a group where everyone had a similar loss that you can relate to, and that you know that they get it and they understand what you're going through. So a support group was a way that I created my new connections to people, and it was what I call my tribe. You'll know if you read my blogs, I call these people my tribe, and you that follow my Facebook page are my tribe. And it gives you, by reaching out, whether it's a support group or anything that you do, it gives you an opportunity and it gives you a renewed sense of community and belonging. It makes you feel, in this quest to rediscover ourselves again and find out who am I. Having that renewed sense of community and belonging not only helps us to rediscover who we are now, it also helps us to be more empathetic and to be more compassionate, and also to understand that, this is a new reality. Even though, we say all the time, I never wanted this, I just want the life I had back. And the reality is that we can't have it. We can't have that one thing that we really want back, which is our loved one and the life we had with them. But by joining a support group and meeting new people, it not only gives you that renewed sense of community and belonging, but it also makes you less lonely. So people ask me all the time, the worst part of dealing with my grief and going through this loss is the loneliness. How, what do I do about the loneliness? And I always will tell you, don't isolate yourself, and joining a support group, or trying to connect with people that have also had a loss, and get it, is a great way to not only ease the loneliness, but give you that renewed sense of community and belonging. And that's how you rediscover yourself. And I have to tell you, I see your comments and I get your emails, on my Surviving Grief Facebook page, which now has almost 300,000 followers. I mean, that, to me, it's a bittersweet number, because there's so many people grieving and so many people that lost someone. But it also gives me a sense of happiness to know that you're finding a place and a community where that can give you a sense of belonging with other people that understand it, and can sympathize with you and to be there for you. And so that's a big, huge part of how you rediscover who you are now, is finding these new people that can support you and you can support them as well. And so that takes me to the last one, number five. Number five is it makes you find new meaning in life, and how the person you lost can inspire you to find a new purpose in your own life. And what I mean by that is, for me, example, I can use myself as an example. After I lost my spouse, I worked for many years in a financial position. I had a degree in social work, but I ended up working in a financial institution, and I stayed there for a long time. But after my loss, I decided what I wanted to do was I wanted, to make sure that I helped other people. I didn't want people to feel as alone as I did in my grief and loss. And so I now do what I do as a grief specialist and writing books on grief and loss. It's not something I ever expected to do, but the loss of my person is what inspired me to find that new purpose in my own life. So that's how you rediscover what your purpose may be. And it can also lead you to new hobbies, things that you never, again, I always say, do that which you thought you couldn't do. If there's something you always wanted to do, you can do it now. And one of the best ways to rediscover who you are and to get those important connections that you need to rediscover who you are is to volunteer. You know, Helping other people will heal your own heart, and it's so important to do that. For me, that's what I did. I started out, how I became a bereavement facilitator is I started out working as a volunteer in a support group as a peer facilitator, the social worker that ran the group, and then I was her co-facilitator, and it was very healing for my own heart to be able to help people in that group that were maybe not as far along as I was in my grief journey. And so again, volunteering in anything that you do, anytime doing something for someone else that makes them feel good makes you feel good, and that's the way you find out who you are, or what you want to do. And it also gives you a renewed commitment to your personal goals. It's like, what are these goals that you have that are going to help you to find your way to who you are now? What this loss has changed you, and we don't like change. And so when you have this change in your life, you need to figure out how you're going to rediscover and make a commitment to have these new goals that are going to bring you to this place of rediscovering who you are now. So those are my 5 ways to rediscover yourself after losing someone you love. And I just want to say to you that if you think about these things, be patient with yourself. You're not gonna do all these things I was talking about by tomorrow. It takes time. It's a process, and you'll fail sometimes. You'll succeed sometimes, but be patient with yourself about that and take all the time you need. There's no time frame for this journey that you're on. There's nothing that says I have to get through this grief. There's this time by next year that I want to be all better. That's just not the way it works. You take all the time you need to do the things you need to do to rediscover who you are now and what your purpose is. And it's important to think about what you want that to look like. What do you want that future that now looks pretty dark, probably, to look like? What's going to bring light into that future? And again, don't be afraid to do anything. And I'll tell you, the best way to keep your mind set on that is to remind yourself that you've already gone through the very worst thing that can happen. Losing your loved one was probably one of the worst things that's ever happened to you. And so don't be afraid to do anything else, or reach out, or take a risk, or explore something, explore the possibilities that might be available to you, because what's the worst that can happen? The worst that's happened has already happened to you anyway. And so those are my 5 ways to rediscover yourself after the loss of a loved one. And I just want to remind you again that it is a great time of year to pick up a copy of my book, Surviving Grief, 365 Days a Year, and give it as a gift, not only to yourself, but to someone else you know that may have lost a loved one, because January 1st is the best time to start reading. Like I always say, we're all just walking each other home. So